Today we're going to step through how to assess rebuttal as a judge. Let's begin by looking at the purpose of rebuttal. Rebuttal can attempt to do three things. It can attempt to show that, firstly, an argument is untrue, which is to say that a piece of rebuttal can demonstrate that the impact the other team is trying to prove either will not happen, is unlikely to happen, or is unlikely to be as large of an impact as that team might claim. Secondly, rebuttal can attempt to show that an argument is unimportant. That means that the rebuttal essentially serves to demonstrate that even if the argument is true, we should not care about its impact in the debate. Perhaps the impact may not affect very many people, it may not matter much to those people, or it may be a morally unimportant impact. Or thirdly, rebuttal can attempt to show that an argument is unproven. That means that the rebuttal would demonstrate that, irrespective of the truth or importance of the argument itself, the team should not be credited for proving it. This can be because they missed some logical steps, asserted elements of the argument, or did not link the impact of the argument to its mechanisms. It's important to remember that not all three of these things are necessary in order for rebuttal to be successful. Successful rebuttal can include just one of these approaches. That is because for an argument to be meaningful in determining the outcome of a debate, it typically has to be true, important, and proven. All three. So, the question you need to ask yourself as the adjudicator is, am I reasonably convinced that this piece of rebuttal demonstrates one of these three things? Remember, rebuttal doesn't even have to be explicitly labeled as such. You might find the answer to that question in a piece of substantive, an introduction, or even a framing device. Let's get more specific. How do you answer that question? How do you know if you're reasonably convinced that a piece of rebuttal demonstrates one of these three things? To a large extent, it has to be demonstrated or assessed on a case-by-case basis. But there are still some basic pitfalls you want to avoid in doing so, which might help guide our thinking around it. So let's go through 5 of them now. Firstly, don't assume that just because an argument has been rebutted, that it has been successfully rebutted. The impact of rebuttal on an argument can range from completely overwhelming it, to mitigating it, to not affecting it at all. Make sure that you're not discounting an argument just because some rebuttal has been given. Instead, make sure that the rebuttal is only credited for the actual impact it has. Secondly, don't assume that just because there's a lot of rebuttal, an argument is defeated. A speaker may provide 8 reasons why they think another speaker's argument is wrong, but if all 8 of those reasons don't amount to much, then the argument may very well still stand. Remember, we assess the quality of rebuttal, not the quantity of rebuttal. Quantity may help, but one good piece of rebuttal may be far more impactful than 8 bad pieces of rebuttal. Ask yourself, how does this rebuttal change what I believe about this argument, rather than just asking how many checkboxes it ticks off. Thirdly, don't assume that rebuttal either has to overcome an argument entirely or not at all. It's not a binary. As I mentioned earlier, rebuttal can weaken an argument without defeating it entirely. This can be true regardless of what the person giving the rebuttal tells you. They may claim that their rebuttal proves why an impact would never happen, but perhaps, in fact, their rebuttal actually shows why an impact is unlikely to happen. It's important to recognize the precise impact rebuttal has when assessing how it should be weighed in a debate. Fourthly, don't assume that arguments that have been very competently rebutted are always arguments that no longer carry any weight in the debate. Arguments can still be impactful, even if they have been heavily mitigated or heavily dealt with by a very good team. For instance, a team may attempt to prove that a particular policy is highly likely to lead to war. If the other team then offered a series of strong rebuttals that showed that war was A, not very likely, and B, not going to be very large, you may still believe at the end of that rebuttal that a war is somewhat likely to happen, and even if it were a small war, that would still be the largest impact in the debate. Remember, very well executed rebuttal still has to be assessed on the actual impact it has on your belief about an argument. And fifthly, don't rebut on behalf of teams. You might disagree with an argument, or you might think that there are obvious responses to that argument, but it's not your place to enter into the debate and make those assessments independently. Adjudicators can obviously assess how convinced they are by an argument initially as it is presented, but they might not interject internally without additional objections being explained by another team. So, in sum, when assessing rebuttal, make sure that you're being holistic. Consider all elements of what has happened in the interaction between teams. consider all the ways rebuttal changes what you believe about arguments, and consider then in turn how that changes what you believe about the entire debate.